Welcome, and thank you for joining today's conference, the Records Information Session Motion Picture Preservation Lab. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the chat panels by using the associated icons located at the bottom of your screen. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. To ask a question over the phone, please press pound 2 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question. Once again, pressing pound 2 will indicate you wish to ask a question. To submit a written question, select all panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat panel, enter your question in the message box provided, and send. With that, I'll turn the call over to Amber Forrester. Please go ahead.
Hello. Welcome to the first Research Services Records Information Session of 2021. Thank you for joining us. I'm Amber Forrester, the Archival Training Coordinator for Research Services. Today's presentation is titled Film Preservation at NARA. Our presenters are the staff of the Motion Picture Preservation Lab, RXMM. RXMM is part of the Moving Image and Sound Labs branch nested under preservation programs. Each year, they wind through millions of feet of film, assessing the condition and determining preservation needs to make NARA's film collections more discoverable and accessible. Preserving and digitizing America's film heritage is a civic duty they feel privileged to be tasked with. In spite of being a small unit of only 5, Audrey, Chris, Heidi, Ivy, and Ken have over 75 years of combined experience. We'll have time for Q&A at the end of their presentation. If you have a question, you can type it in the chat anytime, and we'll open the phone line at the end of the presentation. I am handing things over to Chris now.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Chris Austin, the supervisor of the Motion Picture Preservation Lab. The great film director Orson Welles said, "Film has a personality, and that personality is self-destructive. The job of the archivist is to anticipate what the film may do and prevent it." To that end, we're excited to share how film preservation happens at NARA, who we are and who we serve. Film preservation has been at the forefront of NARA's mission since its inception by FDR, and today we'll go over the characteristics that make film unique and how our lab has been preserving it over the decades. So without further ado, Heidi's going to go over a few film basics to kick us off. Next slide, please.
One of our goals in this presentation is to help you recognize motion picture film, so if you come across it in the records you work with, you will be able to identify it and contact our lab for assistance. On this slide, you see a typical piece of film like you might find at NARA. This clip happens to be taken from a film held at NARA. Next slide. People often use the terms film and video interchangeably, but they are different, and those differences matter to how the formats are stored, preserved, and accessed. Films are stored on a roll, either on a plastic core, as in this photo, or on a projection reel. If you unwind it, you will be able to see an image, as it is a photographic medium, and there are regularly spaced holes along either one or both edges. On the other hand, videos are magnetic rather than photographic media. They are usually housed in a cassette, as in this photo, though some formats may be stored on a reel. Unwind a piece of video, and you will find a thin brown or black plastic tape without holes on the edge. NARA has an audio-video lab that can help you with videos you encounter, but this presentation will only focus on motion picture film and the work of the Motion Picture Preservation Lab. Next slide. Let's take a closer look at a piece of film. The image is contained in frames that play back sequentially. You can see the holes, called perforations, along the edges of the film. Most motion picture films have a printed edge code that can give you valuable information about its manufacturer chemistry, and date of manufacture. This film also contains an optical soundtrack. Not all films contain sound, but those that do lay it down to one side of the image. This piece of film is 35 millimeters wide, but on the next slide, we can see two other common film widths or gauges. 35 millimeter is typically for theatrical productions, 16 millimeter for non-theatrical productions, and 8 millimeter for home movies. The vast majority of film held at NARA is 35 or 16 millimeter. If you encounter any of these in the records and you have questions about their preservation, contact the Motion Picture Preservation Lab. Next slide. Motion picture films are a small percentage of NARA's overall holdings, but with over 500,000 reels held by research services and an additional 20 to 25,000 reels with the presidential libraries, we have a larger film collection than many dedicated film archives with their own buildings and staff. Our collection is the second largest in the United States, behind the Library of Congress, which is responsible for copyright deposit. Most of our films were made by the U.S. government, so they are not restricted by copyright. NARA holds the largest public domain film collection in the world, available for use in productions and research of all kinds. Next slide. In our collection, you will find films made by the federal government, films collected by the federal government in the course of business, and films donated to NARA. Federal agencies produce public service announcements, military training films, public education films, and huge amounts of unedited footage documenting their activities. This GIF is from the title sequence of the USDA's educational Mulligan Stew series on nutrition. Agency-collected films include evidence for investigations and court proceedings, as well as film libraries used by agency staff. This GIF is a home movie collected as part of the Air Force's Project Blue Book investigation into UFOs, so I'm not quite sure where the UFO is supposed to be. Among the films donated to NARA is the Universal Newsreel collection. Universal transferred the copyright of these films, along with the physical reels, to NARA, making these now public domain newsreels one of our most heavily used collections. Next slide. You may wonder why NARA, a government archive, holds donated films. We can thank Franklin Delano Roosevelt for that. FDR was personally interested in film preservation and ensured that in addition to preserving motion picture film records, NARA would be permitted to collect and preserve films and audio recordings pertaining to and illustrative of historical activities of the United States. FDR even gave design advice, suggesting that the film holdings could be kept in a vault under Constitution Avenue. This was rejected, and instead NARA constructed the storage you see in this photo inside of A1. NARA's early staff included Carl Lewis Gregory, a founding member of the Society of Motion Picture Engineers. He and other staff conducted nitrate film storage tests with the Bureau of Standards, and Gregory helped the Library of Congress duplicate some of its paper print collection on an optical film printer he constructed. Hollywood studios relied on this NARA-driven research in designing their own film preservation programs. Next slide. The Motion Picture Preservation Lab moved from A1 to a facility on Pickett Street in Alexandria, Virginia in 1984. When A2 was opened in 1994, we moved into a basement space specially designed to function as a film lab, with darkrooms and light-controlled areas necessary to duplicate and preserve film. A2 was built with freezer storage for motion picture film, and the Pickett Street facility also had freezer storage. So we've been freezing films for almost 40 years. Because proper storage is the foundation of film preservation, our collection is in much better shape than those at institutions without adequate storage. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Chris. So please advance to the next slide.
The bulk of the work that we do is for the Moving Image and Sound branch, also located Archives 2. They're the custodial unit responsible for the accessioning, description, physical control, and serving the records directly to the public. While we also work regularly with the film holding presidential libraries, we provide content for exhibits and public programs, and we're on call for when film pops up in textual holdings or was used to reformat color microfilms. We help fulfill requests from other federal agencies when they need copies of their productions, provide content to a wide variety of patrons who use our records for multiple purposes, and we love working directly with individuals when we can. Such examples include providing copies of films to World War II servicemen who helped make films in our holdings, and to the family of William Graves, who is a well-known Black documentary filmmaker. Next slide. One of the things that makes our job so rewarding are the numerous types of projects we work on. Currently, we're working with the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and a consortium of European film archives to provide copies of films documenting the Holocaust. We're in the midst of providing reference copies to a few presidential libraries, in addition to providing content for the new Truman Library renovation and exhibit. And once we can go back on site again, we'll complete rehousing and care of the Apollo 11 65mm original negatives and do further work on NARA's multi-screen special venue films. In the past 5 years, we prepared the footage used in the Apollo 11 movie, completed 4K forensic scanning of the Iwo Jima flag raisers to definitively identify the servicemen, collaborated with the Academy Film Archive on World War II film restoration projects, and wrapped up scanning over 800 reels of the World War I Signal Corps historic film collection. Next slide. One of our main jobs is technical processing. There's basic processing, augmented processing, and then there's technical processing, which is like augmented processing on steroids. This will be covered in more detail by Ken, but the important takeaway here is that sifting through dozens of reels per title supports RRSM's goals in processing a variety of record groups, making them available to the public through the catalog, and in identifying preservation needs as we go through the records. Next slide, please. Another service that we provide is vendor inspection. Every preservation copy that goes to one of our approved reformatting vendors goes through the lab to receive a full inspection before it leaves the facility, and once it returns to ensure that the film wasn't damaged while it was out of our custody. Usually this is pretty straightforward business, but in about 15% of cases, requests come in for items that haven't gone through technical processing and then require that this service occur before the appropriate reels can be sent to the vendor. Next slide, please. Reference digitization supports our preservation efforts by potentially decreasing the number of times a record is pulled. As such, every reel is inspected or treated prior to digitization, and sometimes we identify preservation needs during the process. This is also an area where technical processing proves important. Most of the time, the reference requests from the public are straightforward, but in some cases, the title requires technical processing so we know which reels should be scanned to make the content available. To learn a little bit more about technical processing, I'm going to turn this over to Ken. Next slide, please.
every film that comes into the lab is inspected to assess its condition. This is done before films are sent to a vendor or before a film is put onto any piece of equipment, such as a scanner to make a new reference copy. What I'm going to talk about right now is technical processing, which is one of the most involved forms of inspection. Films that come into the archives are initially assessed by the motion picture branch. It is at that point that determination is made whether the film is accepted into the archives as a permanent record. Once a film title is determined to be permanent, the components of the film are sent to the lab for technical processing. The ultimate goal of technical processing is to identify our most original film copies, to protect them from damage and decay, and allow suitable duplicates to be made available for access. Next slide. Films arrive for technical processing in all sorts of condition. They have often been held by the agency that produced it in varying levels of storage and handling. But just as you can't judge a book by its cover, you can't judge a film by its can. This can looks pretty horrible on the outside, but, next slide. If you look at the photo on the left, you see that this can did in fact do its job, and the film inside of it looks to be in pretty good shape. Whereas a photo on the right shows what can greet you upon opening a can that otherwise looks in good shape. Next slide. As I previously noted, it is up to the archivists of the motion picture branch to make the decisions as to what film titles are accessioned. It is then up to the lab to do the technical processing, which determines where the physical items fit into the archival set. The archival set is divided into three instances: a preservation, intermediate, and reference copy, labeled with corresponding color swatches of red, yellow, and green, like a traffic light. The preservation copy is the best and most complete copy of the film title. If there are no other physical copies or elements of the film, then there will only be a preservation copy. An intermediate copy is complete and in good condition. It may be sent out to vendors in place of the preservation copy. Finally, there are reference copies, which may be viewed by researchers on machines in research room at Archives 2. Next slide. These are just some of the tools of our trade. Some of these tools allow us to measure and record the information of the film. Cotton gloves, which you can see in the front center there, allow us to handle the film safely without getting oil or fingerprints onto the film surface. Synchronizers, which you can see on the left side of this arch, measure the length of the film, while the shrinkage gauge, which you can see in the front here, measures just how much of the physical base has shrunk over time. We use splicers, which are on the right side of the arch, to attach a leader to the beginning and end of the film roll. Leaders serve many purposes, giving us a place to put identifying information about the roll, giving a length of film that can be used to thread equipment like scanners, and finally providing protection for the film itself. There are a number of tools spread out through the middle there that help us clean and repair the film if necessary, including X-Acto knives, razor blades, solvents, and cotton pads. Finally, the film is wound onto an archival core, which you can see a couple on the right-hand side in front of the splicer, and placed into an archival can. You see some examples in the back left. Next slide. As we inspect each roll of film, there are a number of factors that we need to assess to determine where it may fit in the archival set. One of the first things we do when we start opening cans of newly accessioned film material is assess the element type. The first thing we determine is if the element is a camera original. Camera originals can be negative, as the film strip you see on the left here, or reversal, like the film strip in the middle. If NARA didn't receive any originals, we look for printing intermediates like duplicate negatives that were used to create prints for distribution. Lastly, we have projection prints like the film strip on the right. These prints have often been subject to normal wear and tear from repeated screenings. We sort these elements until we have built the archival set. Next slide. Film gauge refers to the width, perforation arrangement, aspect ratio, and all of the other characteristics that make up a film format. This determines what type of equipment the film can be run on. Although there are dozens of other formats, ranging from 3 millimeter up to 105 millimeter, NARA holds examples of the film gauges represented on this slide, with 16 millimeter and 35 millimeter being the overwhelming majority. We do, however, have a small amount of films of other gauges. These include 70 millimeter films made by NASA and a number of 8 millimeter films from various agencies. In some cases, films were printed from one gauge to another, but usually the resulting blow-up or reduction is of lower quality than the source. This must be considered during technical processing to ensure the best quality copies are retained in the archival set. Next slide. As can be seen on this slide, film is made up of layers. The plastic base layer provides the support needed to carry the images, sound, and other information contained in the film's emulsion. Identifying the type of plastic base the base is made from can help us determine the age of the film, the likelihood that it will deteriorate, and how it should be stored to ensure long-term preservation. Next slide. Edge information provides us clues about where, how, and when the film was made. Sometimes the edge markings come from previous generation film, as you can see in the example in the upper left-hand side corner. Lab staff are able to distinguish between the actual and printed through markings to determine what we have. We also look for the footprint of printed through perforations to help us determine the generation, as you can see in the top of the film on the right. Next slide. Of course, as we collect all this information, we need to record it somewhere. What you see here is part of an example inspection sheet. The full sheet contains information on the complete archival set, as well as notes taken by the inspector during the inspection. These notes can include issues that were encountered, how those issues were resolved, and information found on film cans or on the paperwork inside of the cans. We also make a note of any film elements that were discarded in the process of inspection. All the information on these sheets are entered into a database with the original inspection sheets retained in the stacks. Next slide. And finally, the information on the inspection sheets can be used to determine the film's risk level, which overall helps us make preservation decisions on a larger scale level. And now I'm going to turn it over to Audrey, who will go over some of the various things we can find when we open these cans. Next slide.
In most cases, the films we inspect are in good condition and only need some minor repairs. Our mission is usually accomplished when we make sure that the best elements are protected and access is made possible, but this is not always the case. Next, we'll be going a bit further into the types of decay seen in film and what we do at NARA to prevent information loss. Next slide, please. Nitrate-based deterioration drove all of the early film preservation movement. Nitrate won't wait was the cry that resulted in funding to copy the flammable stock to so-called safety film or acetate film base. The picture on the left, which is the only image you'll see today that was not taken in the lab, shows late-state nitrate decomposition. The film is oozed out sticky bubbles, and a red powder covers the film in the inside of the can.
The image on the right, which comes from RG64, shows a nitrate film that has reached a late stage of decomposition and is just a white brick of material. As research services staff, you probably know that we no longer seek to acquire nitrate film at NARA, and that's because, next slide, please. Right, so in 1978, we sadly suffered a disastrous fire. It was actually our second nitrate fire that consumed millions of feet of film. The fire was preventable and pretty much everything was done wrong that day, if you read the report. But the result was that NARA kicked into high gear to copy all remaining nitrate-based films to safety stock and destroy the originals. For 30 years, we continued this way. We do still come across nitrate films from time to time. I mean, they stopped making nitrate in 1950, but those films continue to exist today. They didn't all spontaneously combust on us. Some are at presidential libraries, some turn up in our are already accession holdings that we previously missed, and some do come in new accessions. In fact, Chris found one in the Rod Cross collection just a few weeks ago when she was on site. Today, though, we make new polyester film elements and send the nitrate copy off to the Library of Congress's National Audiovisual Conservation Center in Culpeper, Virginia, which has shiny new nitrate vaults in which to store our 85 reels or so. So a very small amount of our collection. Next slide, please. As you also probably know, safety film may have been less prone to deadly fires, but ended up having its own self-destructive tendency. Acetate film does very poorly in hot and humid conditions, so countries with tropical climates were the first to experience the deterioration labeled vinegar syndrome by Harold Brown, an archivist at the British Film Institute. The vinegar smell, of course, indicates that the acetate base is deteriorating and off-gassing acetic acid. A film may seem fine for a while and just smell bad, but as time goes on, the base becomes an unreliable support for the images contained on the emulsion, and you start seeing some of the problems in these photographs. The film in the middle had very high shrinkage and a softened film base that made it really tricky to preserve. The one on the right, a film from the hot and humid Panama Canal zone, was essentially deaccessioned because just touching it caused it to shatter. Nothing could be done, and that record was lost. Next slide, please. Just like with paper, you get mold when film gets wet. It's really not a great thing, but we don't see it a lot at NARA because we do keep our vaults at ideal humidity and temperature, and we've been lucky enough not to have any water emergencies. The film you see there was a non-permanent record stored at one of the federal record centers. So we don't have to worry about it, but you can tell that a water event absolutely destroyed it. So not great. Next slide, please. The examples seen here are issues with the film emulsion or the actual images themselves rather than the plastic support. They're all relatively common, with the most prevalent in our holdings and throughout the world being color dye fading. If you have family photographs from the 1970s, you've seen that magenta shift. And it's really important to note that it didn't turn magenta. What actually happened is that the cyan and yellow layers faded over time, and the magenta is the most stable dye in the three layers, and so that's what's left behind. Next slide, please. As I explained, acetate film wants to break down over time. Vinegar syndrome is the biggest threat to NARA's film holdings because it can result in complete information loss if it advances beyond our ability to duplicate, like the film we're showing you here, which luckily was just an extra copy. We had other preserved copies, but this is what happens if you let vinegar syndrome go. There was nothing we would have been able to do for that film. We've already said it, and it will be said again, but the most important thing NARA does to prevent the loss of our film is to store it properly. It becomes really obvious if you walk into the stack where we store our reference copies. They're kept in warmer conditions, so they'll be ready to serve the researchers, and most staff tell us they can smell the vinegar when they walk in there. The good news, of course, is that since we do a thorough job with technical processing, and NARA has been following this process for decades, we only have reference copies there. And so our preservation elements are now stored in ideal conditions. The lab also tests every film that we inspect with an AV or acid detecting strip that we get from the Image Permanence Institute at RIT. Just a note, that's what you're seeing in the bottom right-hand corner. The strip starts at that dark blue color, and as it advances, it will turn yellow. We record the information on the inspection sheet, and we flag any film with a reading of 1.5 or above for duplication. Level 1.5 is where the chemical decomposition will increase exponentially. So it's a real trigger point for us that we have to do something. The goal is to make sure we capture all of the information on the film when it's still relatively easy to do so. Next slide, please. As we said previously, color fading is a major problem in NARA's holdings. Film prints were not expected to circulate for more than a few years, and more stable dyes were more expensive. So Kodak didn't make the switch to a non-fade color stock until Martin Scorsese realized the films he made just a few years before in the 1970s were already faded, and this became a big issue for Martin Scorsese in 1980. He gathered enough of the industry around him that said they were, concerned about this. They didn't want all their films that were made on Eastman print stock to be fading, and so they finally fixed it within a couple years, pretty quickly actually. At NARA, we store color film in below freezing temperatures to slow color dye fade, but unfortunately the prints were likely already magenta when they came into our custody because they were only intended to last an average of 4 years. Negatives and inner positives, which needed to be stable to make future prints, fared much better. In a lot of cases, we usually have a decent element we can work from to do preservation or digitization, and they're kept in our freezer so they won't fade anymore. Next slide, please. While we can't do anything to really fix the color fading in the film itself, and we wouldn't want to do anything to the film itself, generally we try not to change the original in any way, we will use digital tools to rebalance the color when we make access copies. As you can see here, a magenta print that has been rebalanced ends up somewhat muted. Sometimes we're lucky and there's actually enough color, even if it looks magenta, there's enough of the cyan and yellow there that you can end up with a natural looking result. With all the 1 or 2 negatives from the 1950s that I've seen while I've been at NARA, the color dye fade has been minimal enough that we ended up with a really good result. Next slide, please. Mechanical damage is really straightforward. When people mishandle film, you get tears, broken parts, and scratches. Even careful handling of brittle film can result in unintended damage. And that's a problem because the only way to access the information that's on a film is by running it on some piece of equipment, whether it's a flatbed viewer in order to just watch it, or we're running it on a scanner so we can make digital copies, or we're making a new film print. You have to run it on a piece of equipment to get that information off. So that's one of the reasons that every film must be prepped before digitization or photochemical duplication. A loose splice can catch and a torn perforation can become a tear. It's also important that every film be properly wound before it's put back in the stacks in its archival can. With more than 500,000 reels of film, any one can might not come out again for years. And so if you haven't wound that with a nice flat wind and you've got edges sticking out, over time the uneven winds will result in damage as the weight of the film slowly bears down on those uneven edges. And then we have to repair that, and it was an unnecessary bit of damage that could have been prevented. Next slide, please. Film repair is about adding support when the film base has failed, usually in the form of archival splicing tape. It takes good hand-eye coordination and close attention to detail to ensure you don't trap any bubbles, dust, fuzz, or even your own fingerprints under the tape. It can be time-consuming, and it's almost always tedious. In the example you see here, a previous tear was badly repaired. That misalignment could have caused further damage if run on a flatbed viewer or a film printer. One of our staff carefully removed the old tape and realigned the 2 pieces of film. Next slide, please. Although some of our film holdings were created as preservation elements, most of it came to us directly from the agencies. We have thousands of projection prints that were used and abused, and printing elements that were stored in poor conditions before they came into our custody. Dirt and projector oil are the result of regular use, but they become an archival problem. Dirt trapped in the coils of a film can result in scratches and can damage our precious scanners and printers. Every preservation element that will go on a piece of equipment is cleaned on our ultrasonic cleaning machine, as you see on the right. We also do some hand cleaning as necessary for projector oil and other residue. Next slide. Tape is the bane of our existence. Tape of all kinds was used as part of the production process or to make on-the-fly splices when a film broke. Even when it doesn't cause chemical decay, like in this picture of a Truman Library film, it dries out, it oozes, it gets sticky, and it can be tricky to remove. We spend a lot of time removing tape. Next slide, please. It's a little hard to see in this series of images, but here Heidi was removing thick black electrical tape that was applied to every one of the hundreds of splices in the original A&B rolls of the Oscar-winning short, Jenny is a Good Thing. We don't really know why someone did that. They were probably reinforcing the splices, but it resulted in days of work for Heidi that she kind of slowly took out and would work on for a while until, till she couldn't take it, and then she would put it away and work on it some more. It was not pleasant. Important, of course. That tape did not get added at NARA. That happened some point in the film's history before it came to us. Removing tape from film involves carefully lifting the edges with a tool and then cleaning the area with a film-safe solvent to remove any adhesive residue. Often our fingernails are the safest tool for this task because they're least likely to scratch the film. With really difficult tape, we apply solvents and wait for the adhesive to dissolve. Next slide, please. I'll be handing it off to Ivy, who will tell you more about preservation.
Now that we've looked at what film deterioration and repair, let's talk about what we can do with film for the long term. Next slide, please. Some institutions narrowly define preservation as photochemical duplication. However, the field generally defines preservation as any actions performed to make records permanently accessible. We do not consider a film to be preserved if we cannot ensure long-term accessibility. Films are kept accessible by keeping them in cold storage to prevent deterioration, by photochemical duplication where deterioration is present, and by digitization when duplication is not possible. We have encountered about 5 films at NARA that could be neither duplicated nor digitized, which we consider to be a good record. Photochemical preservation is a tried and true method supported by decades of research. Digital preservation is a method that is still in development, although it is quickly becoming the more common plan of action. Next slide, please. Cold storage is the foundation of our preservation actions. Research conducted by the RIT Image Permanence Institute indicates that consistent storage in freezing temperatures will significantly slow the progression of vinegar syndrome, which, as touched on earlier, is the biggest threat to our holdings. Simply slowing this type of deterioration will improve the longevity of the film, which allows us to meet our access goals. Next slide. When using the pictured test strips, this chart from IPI tracks an estimated progress from the onset of vinegar syndrome, which corresponds to AD strip level 1.5, to what is considered poor condition, or AD strip level 2. Assuming average room temperature and humidity conditions for the state of Maryland, and also assuming that a film may leave cold storage for 2 to 3 days a year, a reel of film at the onset of vinegar syndrome would take 3 years to progress to poor condition if it was left at room temperature year-round. However, if that same film was kept in cold storage, it would take an estimated 300 or so years for the film to deteriorate further. Cold storage makes a huge difference in staving off deterioration. This is important because after level 1.5, the symptoms of vinegar syndrome lead to a significant loss of information, such as color fading and image distortion, which is not reversible. Next slide. Photochemical duplication is considered by the professional moving image community to be the most valuable method of preservation. A properly produced copy will retain the most information compared to the original record, and when stored in the appropriate conditions will far outlast the constant changes of digitization technology. Video file standards change and become obsolete over time, and files require constant monitoring and migration to new hardware. So when a hard drive fails, files need to be rescued, if they can be rescued at all, and then transferred to another drive, whereas a properly stored physical film copy is a more permanent solution that can be accessed at any time and digitized with the current technology of the day. Photochemical preservation requires far less intervention than digital preservation, and we are currently able to duplicate 16 and 35 millimeter film. 8 millimeter enlargement to 16 millimeter is completed through a contract with Color Lab, an external vendor in Rockville, Maryland. This allows us to work with the resulting 16 millimeter copies more easily. Next slide. Here you can see some of our machinery at work. On the left is a BHP contact printer, which is designed to duplicate film to blank film stock. And on the right is the LLK soundtrack recorder, which creates new optical soundtracks. Next slide. In the motion picture field, we use the term processing to mean the photochemical development of film, turning a latent image into a visible image. Although we can print all of our films in-house, all processing is completed through a contract with Color Lab. When processed films return to us from Color Lab, we do perform quality control actions to ensure that there are no errors resulting from either the printing or the processing. This is done by watching the film on a chem film viewer, which you can see in the image on the right. Next slide. Digitization at a high resolution may be considered when photochemical duplication is not possible. Occasionally, a film may be too deteriorated or damaged to run on a film printer, but it may fare better on a film scanner. Although a digital video file may not last as long as a photochemical copy, it is the most useful product that can be obtained from a film in such a deteriorated state. The high-resolution files can be used to create derivatives ranging from a theatrical screening copy to a researcher access file. We're currently able to digitize 16 and 35 millimeter. Next slide. We currently scan 16 millimeter film at 2K resolution and 35 millimeter at 4K, both of which are larger than high definition. An overscan captures valuable information outside of the picture area. Our preservation scanners capture images as DPX files, which are designed to represent motion picture film and can be used for advanced color correction. One DPX file is created for each still frame of film. So for example, there are 16,000 frames and 11 minutes of 35 millimeter, which is a standard 1,000 foot reel length. So an hour of film digitized at 2K equals roughly 1 terabyte of data, while an hour of 4K is about 6 terabytes. So you can see just how much data needs to be managed as a result of digitizing just one short film using these appropriate settings. Next slide. To give you an idea of our digital preservation process, this graphic shows our workflow for creating those DPX files. Audio is captured as a separate file and then joined with the DPX before heading to storage. These files can also be output to other workflows to create the derivatives as needed. Now we'll return to Chris to talk about what else we do. Next slide, please.
As you've seen, we're a mini powerhouse behind the scenes at NARA, but we also shine on a much broader stage. Next slide, please. After we've created the archival sets, done the preservation work, and digitized the items, they go to a variety of places. Low-resolution files go onto the servers in the research room and into the catalog. Higher quality files go onto NARA's YouTube channel or are featured on the Unwritten Record blog for introduction to a wider audience. The reels prepared for vendor requests are scanned at high resolution for broadcast television programs or at an even higher resolution for theatrical releases, such as the NASA footage featured in Hidden Figures and in Apollo 11, which was made up entirely of archival footage. Next slide, please. We also participate in our professional organizations. We're members of EMEA, FAGI, and FIOF, where we collaborate with our colleagues in the field, in addition to contributing to publications, working groups for best practices, and ensuring that we stay current in our field. We give talks, write articles, teach classes, and have been mentors to rising preservationists. We feel that all of these outreach efforts are just as important as the regular work we accomplish every day. Next slide. And you can stay current with us too. You can keep up to date with us via our blog, which also features great material from our colleagues in RRFM, along with the still pictures and cartographic branches. Our scans are on YouTube, we're on Twitter a little bit, we love Giphy, and you can also follow us on the ICN's Media Cafe page. Next slide. So in a nutshell, we're a one-stop shop charged with preserving, digitizing, and technical processing of our nation's beloved moving image heritage. And we also love answering questions, so feel free to get in touch. If you'd like more information on any of these topics or anything else you've heard today, please let us know. Thanks very much for your time, and I guess we'll turn it back over to Amber.
Thank you so much. That was so informative and really, really interesting. We have just a few minutes for Q&A. So, operator, can you please remind people how to ask questions via phone?
Sure. To ask a question over the phone, please press #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. You'll hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question. Once again, pressing #2 will indicate you wish to ask a question.
Thank you. We've already had a couple of questions come in via chat, so we'll jump right into those. But in the meantime, please keep them coming via chat as well. The first question is, what are your guidelines for using a cement splice versus a tape splice?
Audrey, would you like to take this one?
Sure. So making a cement splice can be destructive because usually you're cutting a frame. So we wouldn't normally do that in the middle of the film, but we do use cement splices to attach the leader to the beginning and the end, unless it would require losing a frame. So usually there's a bunch of extra stuff at the beginning and end anyway, of blank film or, where there was print through from old leader, things like that. And so we'll use a cement splicer because it's a permanent, it's using a solvent that actually welds the film together, melts it together essentially. And so we'll use that for the leader, but we won't use it for any place within the film where it would risk losing a frame. Hope that answered the question.
Thank you. This is kind of along the same lines. When you remove old tape, how do you reattach the two pieces?
You want to continue, Audrey?
Yeah, we use archival splicing tape and put it back together very carefully. The only thing you can really do is add new support, and the tapes that we have now are supposed to be safe. And so you just put it back together as carefully as you can, and then you very carefully cut out all of the perforation holes and trim all the edges so that it won't end up being a problem.
Thank you for that. The next question, with Hollywood moving more and more towards digital productions, is there a challenge in acquiring film stock for preservation purposes? And if so, is there a plan on moving our own preservation to digital files? What might digital preservation look like related to scan type and storage?
Well, I can answer the first part of this question, and then maybe I'll let Heidi answer the second part. But it is getting more difficult to acquire film stock for preservation. In fact, Kodak no longer makes 16 millimeter black and white films, so we have to plan very carefully as to which titles or items we're going to preserve using that stock. And this winter, actually in December, Kodak announced that it was going to stop making the inner negative stock that we use to preserve our color print film. And then as far as the challenges of digitization, I will turn that over to Heidi.
Okay. So we do know that eventually we will only be able to preserve digitally, but we need there to be more development in the equipment and the storage services that NARA is using. And I know there's a lot of work being done on ERA right now. One of our biggest problems with the size of our files is being able to move them around. So we need to consider how can we get a 2 terabyte file up to ERA and back from ERA in a short amount of time rather than having to wait to physically send a drive if we need something in a rush. Also, it's more data, so it costs more to store it. And I know there's a lot of different levels of storage available through cloud services, but we should also be investigating, is there a way to store it on tape on site or off site at Rocket Center? There's a lot of options, but it's going to be a huge amount of data as we transition to digital preservation, and it's going to require a lot of work and investment to make sure that we can handle it.
All right, the next question is, does NARA have any 70 millimeter film or other less widely used formats?
I will actually hand this one off to Audrey because she is very well familiar with some of our special venue films.
Yeah, so there was a slide earlier on, and that really did show all of the gauges we have at NARA. So other film archives around the country and around the world will have all sorts of oddball formats, 28 millimeter, and lots of 9.5. We really only mostly have 16 millimeter and 35 millimeter, but what we do have is the 70 millimeter is primarily the 65 millimeter NASA negatives, and that's a format that the negative would be 65 millimeter and the positives were 70 millimeter. And then we had these things that they're NARA calls special venue films that were primarily agencies put them together to show at World Fairs. So they were multi-screens and they also were large format. So we have just a handful, but they are, if people know much about this Apollo 11 partnership we had, it was one of the best things that ever happened to us for our ability to complete. And we've sort of explained this a little bit, but if a film is not accessible, we don't consider it fully preserved because we don't know if we're going to be able to get the information off the film. And so all of our 70 millimeter holdings were completely inaccessible to us because we didn't have the equipment, and the cost of sending them somewhere to get scanned or, have new film elements made was just exorbitant. And what the Apollo 11 partnership did was they agreed to scan all of our 70 millimeter film, and they did that. And so we're slowly getting some of those files back, and of course COVID has caused all sorts of problems for everything we've been trying to do, but we will be able to make all of those films accessible soon. And so the bulk of it is NASA, and then these special venue films are a smaller number, but they're more complicated because they had multiple screens or some other funky things with them that we have to figure out how to replicate that in just a digital file someone's going to watch on a computer screen. The other thing you might have seen on that screen was we have one 9.5 film. We have 2 reels of a 3-reel abridgment of a Japanese film that was seized from a Japanese-American businessman during World War II. So it belongs to the records of the Office of Alien Property. And that is actually the only film we have in our holdings that at this point, other than the few that have preservation issues that have made it so we couldn't do anything, we're kind of waiting until maybe there's something we can do in the future. That's the only film we can't access right now. So it's sitting in our, it's being well taken care of in our film vaults, and one day, hopefully, when we get scanners that aren't as gauge dependent, we'll be able to scan that and see if it fills in any gaps. We know that it is made by an important Japanese director, and there's only one other copy at an archive in France. So someday we're hoping to be able to provide access to the content on those 2 reels. That was a ramble, I'm sorry.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Unfortunately, we're out of time for the rest of the questions, so I'm going to email those to Chris so that we can get an answer for anyone asking questions. And if you're waiting to ask a question on the phone line, please feel free to email your question to Chris as well. I'm sorry for volunteering you.
That's fine. That's what we're here for.
Thank you. Thank you to Audrey, Chris, Heidi, Ivy, and Ken for a very informative presentation, and to the audience for your participation. As a reminder, this session has been recorded, and the recording link will be added to the Research Services Training and Development Directory when it's available. You can find the directory link in each of Anne's weekly check-in newsletters. The next presentation in this series is on Wednesday, February 24th at 1 p.m. Eastern. NARA's SME for Aerial Film, Corbin Atkin, will be giving a presentation titled Researching Aerial Photography. I hope you can join us. Thank you again to the Motion Picture Preservation Lab staff.
Thank you.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Services. You may now disconnect.